Good morning, everyone. Welcome to On Iron Arms in the United Kingdom. We are live from Rochdale here for the Buhurt League Challenger, and this is the women's 5 versus 5 event. We have two teams, Swords of Cygnus and Armoured Combat Gloucester, who are in the black and red, and the marshals will start the first of this round. This will be the best of three, as there are only two women's teams in this tournament. And already the fight moves to the sides of the lists. But you can see there's some good pull weight from, you see, Gloucester, who are not able to break through, but there is still a loose runner in the side who has actually caught their opponents. And I think in this team, Swords of Cygnus do have a height advantage, but there's been a lot of training recently, which has been a very positive side, because, and that's already the first takedown there. So a great move there from Armoured Combat Gloucester, who came in very, very effectively from the side. It was not a particularly fast one, but the Swords of Cygnus fighter was caught unaware of that, and you can see how important it is to keep your peripheral vision open, especially with such a wide-vised Buhurt helmet. And still in a stalemate in the clinches. However, there's another Swords of Cygnus fighter who's gone down now. Armoured Combat Gloucester with a big advantage at this point. This is a great start from them. The younger team of the two in terms of their experience, but they have certainly proved their worth, doing a lot of training also under Pavel Kurzak. In fact, getting some words of support from him before this opening round to start the day off. And there are two reserve fighters from Armoured Combat Gloucester. You can see even some words of training coming through at the moment, and that's another fighter down. This is great work now from Armoured Combat Gloucester, who are taking full control of this fight. And I think now it is a question of time, but they're going to have a lot of work to do to get those Swords of Cygnus fighters down at that point. One, of course, on the list is in an uncomfortable position. Of course, there are a number of ACG fighters hanging down, but I think they've got to do a lot more leg work rather than just the strike works from those small axes, which are fairly ineffectual on the back and the sides of the Swords of Cygnus fighters. However, there's a hook point now on the leg of the Swords of Cygnus fighter who's hanging on to the list, and that is it. First round victory for Armoured Combat Gloucester. Well, all of their fighters were on their feet at the end of that first round, so a great start from them, and Swords of Cygnus will need to pull something out that's pretty special in order to get right back into this. So there'll be time for some changes, and they've not long been training together again, with the COVID restrictions having been lifted for sports events back in May in the UK. Now, the conditions here today, as you can see on the live screen, we've got traditional British weather. It's cloudy. It's quite windy as well, so in terms of atmospheric conditions, it's quite ideal. The grass here is dry, so that sort of avoids the problem of slipping. However, the more it gets trodden down, and the more it will cause difficulties for the fighters. And even though this is taking place in a small town, a number of people who have come out to watch and support the event, also some local journalists as well. It's a sign of how the UK is picking up these events and getting restarted, not only with training but also with the events. Don't forget, there is another event which will be held in November, which will be the Cygnus Cup, hosted by and organised by the Swords of Cygnus. So we'll have a full day of action. We are all on time at the moment, so there will be these women's 5 versus 5. After that, there will be the men's 5 versus 5, and of course the men's 12 versus 12 later, followed by the award ceremony at the end of the day, which is scheduled for 5:30, but it may be a bit earlier than that. So there are 5 men's teams, which is good. However, all eyes go back to Swords of Cygnus versus Armored Combat Gloucester in the second round. ACG taking the first round with an emphatic victory of 5 fighters to 0. And while you see that the ACG fighters are fairly slow on their feet, they're very, very solid, and they've got some great footwork in terms of the grappling. And if they find a loose Swords of Cygnus fighter, then they're going to be able to capitalise on that. Swords of Cygnus, however, don't seem to be as well glued together as they have been in the past. And now you can see that there are clinches breaking off in different parts of the list. Still looking for the first takedown there. Just if you look on the right, you have one ACG fighter breaking loose, but also so too does a Swords of Cygnus fighter, so that will create another clinch in the back. Well, on the left-hand side, you can see how both clinches have come together, and they're forcing each other against the list and trying to grapple the legs around each other in order to obtain a trip. But at the moment, that's going to be very difficult with such a close space. Of course, the taking out legs works if there is the space to do so, but you know, with so many fighters around each other, that's a good grapple there from the ACG fighter in the bottom right-hand corner. And it's moved also into the corner of the list. And of course adds a lot of support and makes it even harder to get them down. And it's still even at the moment. Both teams are evenly matched. No fighters down yet. However, there is movement in the grapple in the right-hand corner, and they too have broken off. And so some rather sluggish blows coming in from time to time, but I think there's been a lot of work and a lot of practice and training on the grappling there. If you can see on the left-hand corner there's a lot of weight coming down on the Swords of Cygnus fighter who's found himself in a difficult position, manages to get out of it somehow. But of course, when the head is lower than the chest, there are difficulties, and it looks like we've got one Cygnus fighter who is almost out of the list on the right-hand side. Any assistance there will cause problems for the Swords of Cygnus. And this is great work from Armoured Combat Gloucester, who, although do not have any numerical advantage at this point, do appear to be the stronger side. Of course, this round might go to the absolute limit here, as it's very evenly matched. And although you can see on the left there was a charge which came to nothing, however the Swords of Cygnus fighter breaks away, and that could have benefited from a bit of speed there. But there's some nice work from the Armoured Combat Gloucester fighters. Well, I think the ACG were very unlucky not to get a takedown in there, and there's a nice charge coming from ACG to the side there, but of course thrusting against the list is spent energy rather than an investment on taking someone down. I mean, perhaps trying to release the fighter first and using teammates, and there needs to be a bit more vision to what's happening on the other sides of the list. But of course, when you're that far away, it's extremely difficult and you want to take your eye off an opponent. So there's some encouragement coming from fighters and indeed the trainers to be more aware of the legwork. Now, earlier on in this round, we did see Armoured Combat Gloucester try to use a lot of the sweep techniques, but they didn't come out, and they just need to pull that back again because they were very, very close getting some takedowns. And this is there's a nice position there from the ACG in the left-hand corner there, and very close to a takedown. Could be the first one, and there it is, but they've both gone down. It seems like I've seen the marshals has allowed the ACG fighter to stand up, so she did not have all the weight of the weapon and the knee on the ground. So this is good news for Armoured Combat Gloucester, and they have broken the deadlock. So I think we'll see a bit more movement, and you can see on the right-hand side, those clinches are absolutely deadlocked. And pushing on the sides here. seems that you've got on the right hand side, you can see that both fighters on the right hand corner trying to break away from each other and pull from behind, but I don't think that's going to go very far, especially when holding on to the list. Of course, there have been, and that's called stop from the marshal. Good result again for ACG. Calls the start of the second fight between Swords of Cygnus and Armoured Combat Gloucester. And unlike the first fight, it does not go straight to the list. There's a lot more movement in the middle. However, the Cygnus have been pushed back a little into their own area, but this is much more aggressive fighting from both teams, in fact. And there's some great teamwork from Armoured Combat Gloucester, who are looking for a takedown there, very close to a lot of pressure coming down on them, however. Especially on the left-hand side, you can see a grapple in the far corner, and the Swords of Cygnus managed to get out of that very effectively. Well, that's some impressive footwork on their part. However, on the right-hand side, there's a lot of weight now coming down on fighters of both teams there. So they're trying to actually sort of spread themselves out so that they get a bit more coming through in terms of their leg work, of course, which is an issue. And there's a big weight coming down on the ACG fighter. We may get the first takedown here, and indeed the first takedown for Swords of Cygnus, but she breaks on her helmet's come off though. So that, of course, means that she'll be out of the fight. But there was a huge amount of pressure, and another Swords of Cygnus fighter has gone down, so it is even. It's a very even fight now. So the trainers of ACG shouting them to move over to the other side and make the best of the space that they have. And some shoves coming through, but there is a Cygnus fighter in a dangerous position there. Pavel Korczak running around to give some advice on what to do in that position. And there's a very close takedown. And incredible how they managed to keep their feet up. And I think that's, yeah, the Armoured Combat Gloucester fighter has been down by the marshal there. So Cygnus with a advantage here. However, they're going to wear themselves down if they strike too much on the back of the ACG fighter on the right there. So what they need to do now is try to work down the limbs of the fighters, and maybe go for some strikes at certain armor points where they can do the most damage. In fact, yeah, the halberdier is striking low there, and this is a nice move there, and it's also taken down the Swords of Cygnus fighter. Still Swords of Cygnus with an advantage there. A great charge there, and it came to nothing, but it's very, very good movement, good vision by ACG. This turning out to be a much more exciting fight than what we've seen so far. This is great work from both teams, all right back to the Cygnus end of the list. So some big strikes coming down on the ACG fighter, and they're going to have to keep doing that and grind down. Just a couple of strikes is not going to do it, but I think ACG are in some trouble here. But Swords of Cygnus are not yet able to break through. Again, just releasing an ACG fighter. However, a superb move. That is excellent fighting there from ACG, who now even it out. Well, what a fight this is turning out to be. And there's a great pull there from ACG. One of the ACG fighters, however, being sandwiched in the middle under a lot of pressure from Swords of Cygnus. The teammate desperate to try and pull her away from our fighters, and she has dropped. This means it is 2 against 1. So they're not going to want to suicide it. It's just far too dangerous to do that at any time. But it is going to take a lot to get that ACG fighter down. And of course, they need to consider where they're striking, because the way that the Swords of Cygnus are striking the fighter at the moment is not going to be so effective. So again, using the awareness of the legs, which could be a good move. If they could just pull her away now, this could be a good move, and that is done. So victory, therefore, goes to Swords of Cygnus. Oh, a fantastic round. That will have taken a lot of energy out of both teams there. But a really superb fight that was. So there will not be much time to regain their strength. Fight going down to the last three fighters there, 2 versus 1. Of course, when it's 2 versus 1, it can continue. Just to remind you, only when it's 3 versus 1 will the marshals call a stop. But I'm sure you know that already. Again, the conditions are still favourable for fighters. There is a lighter breeze at the moment, which makes fighting quite easy. It was a little bit strong earlier. Of course, you know, it can cause cramps if people take off their armour too quickly. So we're going into the second round of this second fight between Swords of Cygnus and Armour Combat Gloucester. And with a 1 fight advantage. Again, to remind you, it is the best of 3 fights, not the best of 3 rounds. People have travelled a long way to come to this event, and although it is a relatively small town, it's a perfect location for this. So I think still some armour adjustments needed, although this can result in penalty if it's not resolved, or if the marshal calls for a 1 minute to the start. It can result in a round loss or disqualification of the fighter. As you can just see in the bottom right corner, there's a minor adjustment to the armour, but regardless of the scale of the event, this must be up to approval standards of the marshals, who carried out the weapons check at 8 o'clock this morning. Okay, so we go into the second round here. That starts just the commenter Jack Ward there. I think you're at the wrong Castleton. I'm sorry. This is one near Oldham, not near Macclesfield. There's already a takedown there. Going back to the fight. Yeah, still. So ACG with an early advantage there. And in fact, if you look on the left of the screen, you can see some superb thrust and push work from ACG. Oh, and there is a loose run there, but that was some spent energy. But a nice idea, some big weight being put down on the Swords of Cygnus fighter on the left and on the middle of the list. So they will start wearing down the legs of the Cygnus fighter, and we do have actually 2 down on the right hand side. I didn't see that. So this is great work from Armoured Combat Gloucester, who have come right back into this with some very swift work. However, there are some ACG fighters down as well, although they do have an advantage. Some nice evasive work from the Swords of Cygnus just on the left of the screen there. So you have The ACG fighters now wearing down the Swords of Cygnus fighters, or trying to at least. Not quite getting through just yet. However, it does keep the fight in the middle of the list, which makes it a bit more exciting to see. Although the weapon was held, there is still some movement through. So this is good teamwork from Armoured Combat Gloucester. Of course, it's easy to shout instructions to the fighters, but for the fighters to actually hear them and be able to take heed of them, it's another matter altogether. Just to remind you that the venue changed 2 weeks ago because of COVID restrictions. So this is at Castleton near Rochdale. Those of you who are writing on the stream to Mr. Jack Ward. So back to the fight, and well, I think this is going to go on for some time, but there's a lot of aggression coming from Armoured Combat Gloucester. And the movement they showed before was impressive. However, there is a loose weapon which could spell big trouble for the Swords of Cygnus now. The fighter holding on. A great charge, however, coming through. So that was a rush back to retrieve another weapon, which means that it still stays at 3-2, and they're going to have to break away from the list. So I think Armoured Combat Gloucester need to work on the leg game a little bit. There's some high strikes coming in though. They do show a lot of aggression, especially with the shield punches. But I think to take off the balance, and that's better work, the stamp that came in from the side. More of that is going to be how they're going to wear down the legs of the Swords of Cygnus fighters. And the marshals are closely in there. I think they may have seen something there, something discussing something, but I think a fighter has, I can't quite see what's happening, but I think being told that there's fight is called. That may be because of an armor defect. Certainly the Sword of Cygnus fighter had lost her weapon. Okay, we are back for the final fight of Armoured Combat Gloucester against Swords of Cygnus. I'll remind you that this is a best of 3 fights, not rounds. And this will be the final fight of the women's categories today. So ever so slightly behind schedule, but not by much. The men's fights will still begin at 12:30 as scheduled. That's 12:30 British time, and it's really 1:30 in real money. Anyway, we saw some very aggressive fighting from both teams, and I mentioned in the last round that I feel Armoured Combat Gloucester had more of a team strategy working, but Swords of Cygnus has proved very aggressive, and certainly I think the faster of the two teams. And already you can see a good movement, however, from the Armoured Combat Gloucester. And you can see how they pick out the teammates to help. So you've got the runners who come in the middle, and although the charge is lacking in effectiveness and strength, and it's a great takedown there for Armoured Combat Gloucester, as already they have one Swords of Cygnus fighter down. And this is nice work from ACG. And you can see that on the left hand side, the sheer strength that is being put down on the ACG fighter, but they're good on their feet and very solid. So in the bottom right hand corner you can see that there is a clinch coming down, and there's some good movement there. The ACG fighter does extremely well to keep on her feet. Outstanding work there at the top of the list. So now this puts ACG in a very, very good position. So Swords of Cygnus are going to want to keep hold of that list, although in the bottom right hand corner they urgently need to get a takedown as quickly as possible in order to make the numbers a bit closer. Because right now, the ACG have their full team standing as the Swords of Cygnus are down to 3. And so there seems to be a weapon loss on the left side there. But this is still good footwork from the Swords of Cygnus. And again, in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see some nice evasive work from the ACG fighter, despite having a considerable height disadvantage. And there's some exposed parts of the armor that you can see in the middle of the screen in the left, and that is a big takedown there, and that's some superb work. But there's a big charge coming through. She broke away from that just late. However, she's going to have difficulty with the footwork there. It has been called a mistake from the marshals there, which has killed the rhythm of the fight. That's a great charge, however, coming through. So manages to get a fighter back. So, still 2 Swords of Cygnus fighters against 4 of the ACG fighters now. And with a good takedown there, and I think the ACG fighters were a little bit confident, perhaps overconfident in their movement. But of course, the bad call of the marshal disrupted the flow and rhythm, so that might have been a distraction also. But still, at this point, it's hard to see how Swords of Cygnus are going to get out of this one, because they're being pushed further back into the corner, in which case the ACG will have to work on shifting their legs and stopping the Swords of Cygnus fighters from hooking their arms around the list. So Marshall getting as close as possible to the fight there, and now the ACG are looking to wrap the legs around. So I'm not exactly sure why the ACG fighter was down by the marshal there. I think that will be a topic of discussion, but what it does mean is that the numbers are starting to even out. There's some great movement from the Swords of Cygnus, who now brought it down to 2 versus 2. That's incredible fighting. Well, only moments ago I was saying that it seemed difficult that they were able there seems to be very staggered fighting. There appear to be calls from some of the line marshals about arms being pulled back. Well, they've gone right to the corner here, and it's really hard to pick them apart. There's been a gargantuan effort from the Swords of Cygnus to get out of this, but they're in some trouble here, and they might be able to use some of the down fighters to their advantage. So as they push down, and very, very close there, outstanding! Wow. Well, the
2 Cygnus, but we're going to have appeals from Gloucester. There are a few mistakes.
So there. Appeals will come, as has been noted by the head marshal of these proceedings, and some of the calls are being questioned by not only the fighters but also the captain of Armoured Combat Gloucester. So there will be a few minutes to discuss these issues. We'll let you know what the findings are, of course, from this angle on the screen, which from my position is quite hard to see based on the monitor, but I am fairly close to the list. However, it's still hard to see through the list and see exactly what's happening from this angle. So we'll let you know what the outcome of the appeal is. So what's happening here is that the round will be refought. So the result of that will be nullified due principally to the mistaken call of the marshal, who called a stop fight. And of course that, as mentioned while it was happening, it hugely changes the dynamic of the fight. There was also a reset issue, and after the appeals, which were granted by the marshal, the head marshal, it is being refought. So this, of course, again will slightly move us behind schedule, but it means that there's a good takedown there, but of course just on the left. But both have gone down, so it is 4 versus 4, and it's a very aggressive clinch on the right-hand side. Almost a helmet coming loose. Some good footwork from Armoured Combat Gloucester. So they do have a loose fighter, and their fighter's being warned to watch out, watch for the necks. And I think further down the field, the marshal should get in a little bit closer than that. He's taking his eye off the ball, so they need to be careful of that, although the marshal in the bottom right hand corner is in control of what he's doing, keeping a close eye on how things have gone down. Of course, neither team will be particularly happy about the restart, but that's the way it is. These things can happen. Nobody's infallible. So on the left you can see quite heavy leans from the Armoured Combat Gloucester fighters, and I think there's going to be we're quite close to a takedown on the left, whereas on the right hand corner, I think because they're wedged in, and there appears to be an armour. That is an elbow which has come loose on the Swords of Cygnus fighter, so she'll be bitterly disappointed about that. And of course, quite how the ACG fighter managed to loosen it, I'll never know, but that puts them in a good position. There's some nice work, however, on the right hand side, which you can barely see. So there's some nice movement coming out there. ACG have broken loose. This means that the Swords of Cygnus fighter has there's some distraction between the team captain and the marshal. This truly shouldn't happen during the fights themselves. So it is all on the left-hand side of the list now, and there's some weight being put down on Swords of Cygnus fighter, who manages to get out of that one, but she's very lucky to do so. And I think the ACG fighter will get a takedown out of that, but they both go down, which means it is 2 versus 2. And there's some great footwork and grappling in the bottom left-hand corner, but the Swords of Cygnus fighter is not in a good position there. So she breaks around, and they get away from the 2 grounded fighters, who of course can cause serious problems to the blind side of the fighters. But that's a good takedown there, and it goes down to 2 versus 1, so of course the fight will continue. So the Swords of Cygnus with 1 fighter to go against. However, I've seen these many a time won by the single fighter before. However, and this time it will not go that way, and the Swords of Cygnus have the 2 remaining fighters. Okay, welcome back, and we are now looking at what should be the final round of the Swords of Cygnus versus Armoured Combat Gloucester. A previous victory going to Swords of Cygnus in the last round. But I've noticed that Armoured Combat Gloucester are getting the early takedowns, and I wonder if that's a strategy problem of Swords of Cygnus, or it's that early burst that ACG have, and they've been using to some good effect. And starting off with a lot of aggression, and the ACG fighter actually lifting the Swords of Cygnus, but not quite. I think there would have been a good opportunity for some teamwork there to push back and loosen the fighter, who was actually had the feet off the ground and on the back of the ACG fighter. However, there's a charge in the back, but it's not enough to take down the Swords of Cygnus fighter, who is very good on her feet. And while I think that the and that's a fighter down from Swords of Cygnus. I think that was an accident. Actually, I don't think, just in the bottom right-hand corner, I don't think that was a forced error, although I didn't see what was happening behind her from this angle. So this means that ACG have an advantage now, but now we've seen these turn upside down. Again, in most rounds, we've seen ACG have or get an early advantage, as they have done in this round. But they need to, when they have the loose runner, the vision's good, but the effectiveness of the charge is not so high. So you've got three different areas of the list. So the top right hand corner, which you can barely see, and all that's happening in the middle. In fact, most of the action has taken place in that area. A lot of pressure being put down in the bottom left hand corner on the ACG fighter, who manages to stay up. Her feet are off the ground. So orders being shouted out, instructions being shouted out from teammates and team captain. So some good teamwork and good vision from the ACG fighters. However, it was countered by Swords of Cygnus. And I think the experience of knowing where to go, but there's a huge amount of pressure being put down on the bottom left-hand corner of the Swords of Cygnus fighter. And there's an ACG fighter down in the middle of the list. And again, I think that was unforced error. However, they've taken down the Swords of Cygnus fighter at the bottom of the list. And there are more fighters going down very close in the middle there. So the ACG fighter doing extremely well to stay up. Some assistance coming in from her teammate, but it's all action even in the top left-hand corner now. So again, it appears to be in ACG's favour now, but not by much. So the Swords of Cygnus fighter have to be careful. There is one grounded fighter at the bottom of the list there, and if they can get the right movement, perhaps they can use that against them, which they're doing now, trying to push them over, and their balance may be restricted. But that's great footwork from the Armoured Combat Gloucester fighter, who climbs over the Swords of Cygnus. It was a great idea from Swords of Cygnus to use the grounded fighter, but it didn't quite come through. Very good footwork and vision from the ACG fighter. So not long left of this round, very, very close. And you can see that in the middle of the list there is a strong push there from the ACG fighters, who are not managing to take down the fighter there. Oh, good aggression now from Armoured Combat Gloucester. Some movement towards the top of the list there, but this is dangerous now at the bottom of the list. And then this is the point where the fatigue comes in, and you can see in the bottom of the list the fighters are moving to the corner. Being fought all these rounds to top fighters at the bottom there, so that's going to take a strong push. Marshall's getting closer and closer, being careful for twisting arms, and now we'll see what the fighters can do on the left hand side of the list. As you can see, a lot of pressure being put down on the ACG fighter, but the Swords of Cygnus fighter not managing to break through. So close there, but great footwork from the Armoured Combat Gloucester fighter. So, and time has been called there by the marshal. Another really good round, which demonstrates the progress of these two teams in the UK. And we have just 1 minute 26 to fight. So we're looking at some extreme work. That's a big takedown there, however, for ACG. So already with such a strict time limit, they've got a big advantage here. And Swords of Cygnus are going to need to move a lot faster than that in order to even the scores. And it all comes down to this final point, if I'm not mistaken. So these quick takedowns will be extremely important. ACG still with the advantage. Swords of Cygnus not able to get through. And again, some nice movement of outpulling from ACG on the right-hand side. Movement seen, going for the attack. A good charge in, and that's great takedown. Yes, she has gone down. So this is great news for ACG, who are in full control of this round. So with all the pressure of the strict time limit, they're capitalizing on this and now wearing down the Swords of Cygnus. So time, as the clock goes down, ACG get closer and closer. So a lot of weight on the left-hand side being put on the Swords of Cygnus fighter, and that is it. Time has been called, which brings the round victory to Armoured Combat Gloucester.
Gloucester!